Hello, everyone, and welcome to the September Consulting webinar. My name is Michael Mathis, and I am the Client Services Director here at CDI. Today, our webinar topic is Quick Fields can do what? Examples of power users' favorite Laserfiche program. During our webinar today, if you do have any questions, please post them into the questions box. I will try to get to questions that come up during our webinar today, and there will also be time at the end of the webinar to go through and answer as many questions as possible. If you are having any issues hearing me or there's any need for immediate attention, please raise your hand and we can unmute you during the webinar. And some tips for success for today's webinar. Make sure you take good notes and screenshots to help you remember important topics. Don't be afraid to ask questions. We love to hear all of your questions, and any questions that we can't get to during the webinar today, we will reply to after our webinar. Please complete the survey after the webinar. It is just a few questions, and those questions do greatly help us improve in the future, and we love to hear all of your feedback. And remember, this webinar, along with all of our webinars, will be recorded and available on the CDI YouTube page. If you have not checked out our YouTube page yet, please definitely do so, and remember to subscribe to get notifications for new recordings that we post. So today's topic is Laserfiche Quick Fields can do what? Our intended audience for the webinar today is Laserfiche power users and Laserfiche administrators. If you're not a power user and you're not an administrator, please do stay in the webinar today. There is plenty of information that is useful to everyone. During our webinar today, we will be covering some Quick Fields processes, including auto redaction, processing of QR barcodes, document classification, separation of two different document types, and real-time data lookup to fill template fields with retrieved data for one of our document classes. So Laserfiche Quick Fields is a batch scanning and data capture program available as an add-on to your Laserfiche solution. Laserfiche Quick Fields is able to process batches of documents, automatically apply redactions, perform cleanups, and a variety of other processes that are easily configurable within the Quick Fields session designer. The first process we'll be reviewing today is going to be auto redaction. And this is going to be using the auto-annotation process. This process has a lot of configuration options, and it is going to be used mainly for automatically applying redactions to document pages that match a certain specified pattern. The annotations will be applied to an image document and its associated text, or to the text associated with an electronic document, but not to the electronic document itself. The auto-annotation process can be used in pre-classification processing, page processing, or post-processing. When configuring, we are going to first specify which pages we want to annotate in our document. We'll provide a name for the process, such as auto redaction. We're going to configure the annotation type. We have the options of redaction, highlight, strike through, and underline. We're going to specify the text or patterns to annotate and set the annotation's region size. We can also specify the protection level of our annotation. And one important thing to mention is the auto annotation feature requires the auto OCR process to run. So the Quick Fields process needs the text associated with the image or the electronic document in order to find the text to annotate or the portion of the image to annotate. You can extract text from PDFs and documents from Laserfiche using the Laserfiche capture engine, and those will not need to have an OCR process associated with them. A good use case for the auto-annotation process would be, let's say Alice is processing letters that may contain social security numbers somewhere in them, but the social security numbers may not be on all of the documents. They could be on different locations on each letter. They could even be on different pages. So Alice configures the auto-annotation process to look for the pattern of digits and dashes that fits our social security numbers and to redact all instances that would match that pattern. The barcoding process can be used in pre-classification, first page identification, page processing, last page identification, or post-processing to obtain data information from a barcode. The information read from the barcode can be used to populate a template field, to name the document, to create folders, or anywhere else where Quick Fields allows you to use tokens. This process supports many different barcode types, including code 39, code 128, and QR codes. The barcoding process is often used in conjunction with a data lookup process to accurately populate as many fields based on a number encoded in that barcode. And when using the barcode process to make the quick field session more efficient, specify only the barcode types to use that apply for your document. So for example, if you're only expecting a QR code and that's the only type of barcode you would like to read, make sure only QR code is selected. Use only one barcode orientation, so we can read barcodes that are horizontal or vertical. Specifying only one orientation is going to improve the performance and the speed of processing in Quick Fields. And by placing the barcode in the same area of each page and specifying around the region around where the barcode can be found is going to help Quick Fields identify where that barcode is more quickly. If these barcodes are on different locations of the documents, you can still have the process look across all pages. However, it will take longer for Quick Fields to process that information. The next process we'll be looking at today is the document classification process. And this is available with the purchase of the document classification add-on to Quick Fields. With this add-on, it is possible to separate documents into multiple different document classes, which will help you speed up scanning by identifying different types of documents within one big stack of papers. This will allow you to not have to pre-sort all of your documents prior to scanning. Quick Fields will be able to sort them for you. And the last process we'll be looking at today is the real-time process for field lookups. Each document class can be configured to use a different real-time lookup source. And when configuring the lookup process, you can read data from a third-party database, and Quick Fields will need access to reading that, or to be able to read that database. You can use multiple different database sources, such as Excel files, Microsoft Access databases, or a Microsoft SQL database. And the results from that lookup can be placed into the template fields for that document class. When we review the configuration of the real-time process, we will look into the different options that are available for connecting to those data sources. And at this point, we will switch over to a live demonstration of quick fields. So I'm going to open my quick field session here. And on the left, you can see that we have our session configuration. So we have our main session, we have our document classification processing, and we have two separate classifications of documents: invoices and HR letters. We'll start with reviewing invoices and looking at the configuration here. So the first thing we have when we select our invoices node on the left is our sample image. And here we have two separate QR codes. We have our default document name that is going to include the date field and the invoice number field. We have our invoice number being populated, and we have these database icons above other template fields. These database icons indicate that we are filling these template fields from a data lookup from a database. We will come back to those towards the end of reviewing our configuration. Within our invoices document classification, we are going to identify our first page based on our barcode. So we have our first page identification stage, and we have the barcode ID process added in. So this process is configured to look for our QR barcode here. We have our name added as QR ID zone, and we specified where we want quick fields to look for our barcode. We can expand the size or collapse it depending on the size of or the range of where the barcode could be. Next, we have our barcode type, and here we're expecting only a QR code. We can add or remove different barcode options depending on the types of barcodes that we are expecting. We can choose horizontal and or vertical for our barcode direction. And we can specify the minimum character length here. When Quick Fields processes this barcode, it's going to read that data out as a human readable string. We can test our process using the test process link at the bottom. And here it identified our QR code as 100, which matches our invoice number. Next, we'll move into our page processing. So now that we know we've identified our first page, using our first QR code, we'll look at our barcode information to obtain our invoice date, as well as our invoice number. And these are configured the same as they were previously. And we are going to identify our last page based on when the first page identification conditions are satisfied and a new document is created. So it's going to assume we are in the same document until another first page is identified within either this document classification or another document classification. If we go back to our invoices classification, I promised I would come back to the database lookups, and here we are. If we customize the metadata for the current document class, this will bring up the metadata configuration for our process here. So we are going to be using the webinar template, which has all of these fields, and we are not requiring any of these to be populated within Quick Fields. And we are only going to be showing a handful of these fields within Quick Fields. By changing the information within this table, it is not going to adjust the actual template definition or the template field definition. These are going to be what is required by Quick Fields. This is going to customize what is available in the Fields tab. Under real-time processes, this is where we can add all of our real-time processes for data lookups and or field verification. So we are going to work on field lookups here. If we go to summary, this will show us a summary of our options here. So first, we're going to specify our data source. And this is where we will have the options to configure one of three types of data sources. We can use Windows ODBC, which Laserfiche recommends. We can use advanced or direct connections, or we can use a connection string, which is the expert type. For the webinar today, I am going to be showing, or I'm going to be using a SQL database, and I very much prefer to use a direct connection when working with SQL, with Microsoft SQL. You can use ODBC with Microsoft SQL. However, it just adds another layer of complexity on top of that connection. So using our direct connections, I am going to select my data source driver, which is SQL Server, specify my server name and the database where I'm pulling information from, provide the authentication to connect to SQL, and hit finish. Next, under input, this is where we will be selecting which tables and columns we are going to be using to query our data. So we are going to use select a table and columns. The other option is to write a custom query. So if you have a custom SQL query you would like to run to pull back the data from SQL, you can definitely do that. However, selecting a table and columns is much easier. So first we'll use our dropdown to select the data source that we want to use. We can provide the column and column value by clicking the add button. So from column, we are going to select what information or what column we are matching. So for example, customer name. And for value, this is going to say our customer name has to equal our, we could use vendor name, for example. However, that won't work in this scenario. So we have ours set up to look for the invoice number column, matching our invoice number that we read from our QR code. Next, under results, this is where we can populate our template fields from the data returned from the lookup. So we can add, edit, or remove our fields. If we select add, we can select the field to populate. So for example, we could populate our employee name with the value from one of our columns. Here we're matching our date to, or populating our date field with the invoice date. We're populating the terms field, rep name, vendor name, and amount with the data from our database. Next, the trigger settings are going to tell Quick Fields when to run this real-time process. So in this case, we want to run the process when a field changes, and we want this only to be when our invoice number changes. If we wanted to do a lookup based off of more than just the invoice number, for example, we need the vendor name as well, we could check both boxes here, and our real-time lookup will run when either of those fields change. We can also provide when a key is pressed, so if we want to do a hotkey, we could, on our keyboard, press Control Q or whatever key combination we want to use. Or we can run this when the document is processed. The typical configuration that I usually see when we are reading information from a barcode and populating a template field with that information and then performing the lookup off of that information is what we have configured here. So when the document is processed, we want to run the lookup to populate our template information. If for some reason the barcode was read incorrectly or the data contained in that barcode was incorrect, when the user corrects that information in the template field and changes that field value, we'll run the lookup again to repopulate the information in our template fields. And finally, under options, we can select additional options to perform after the lookup is completed. So we can perform field verification, we can show field icons, clear fields when no data is retrieved, and log field changes. Our next document classification is our HR letters. And this classification has additional processes for the auto-annotation process. So first we're going to identify our pages. And our first page is going to be identified based off of our zone OCR. So we are going to look in this region of our document for the text HR salary. We can configure our identification conditions based on other information as well if we add in additional OCR regions. And down towards the bottom, we have a few different options. So we can select our OCR language, which this is going to be English, not Estonian. We are going to select balanced for our optimization for OCR. If our documents are always going to be very clean and easily recognizable by OCR, we can choose speed, and that will speed up the performance. However, the results will be less accurate. On the other end, we can go with accuracy, where our OCR results will be more accurate. However, it will take longer to process. And finally, we can configure the orientation of the text. We have 0 degrees selected because our text is not rotated. Under page processing, so whenever Quick Fields processes a page within this document classification, we are first going to run the OmniPage OCR process, and this is going to OCR the entire page. We have our text zones set up for identifying our employee name, our effective date, salary from, and salary increase to information. And finally, we have our auto-annotation process configured to automatically apply our annotations. So here we are going to apply a redaction, and our redaction color is going to be black. We are going to apply an annotation over the text Cities Digital. So everywhere in the document where we see Cities Digital, this text will be blocked out. So you should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it looks like. 5 redactions when we are all done. We're going to make the redaction region slightly larger just to make sure that we block out that whole text. And our annotation here is going to be a public annotation. Our last page is again going to be identified when a first page is identified in this or another document classification. And we currently do not have any post-processing processes set up. Now that we've reviewed the configuration of our quick field session, I have a sample file containing the document batch that we will be processing. So we have a total of 19 pages with a mixture of invoices, additional pages for the invoices, and HR letters. To scan from a Windows folder, I am using the universal capture scan source. You can also use the Laserfiche capture engine to capture images, documents, electronic files that are already existing within your Laserfiche repository, or Twain or WIA to scan using a physical scanner. Since the images are on my computer, I'm going to use universal capture. I'm going to start scanning. And we can see QuickFields is pulling in and processing all of those individual pages from that PDF, or I'm sorry, that multi-page TIFF. And at the bottom, we can see the output from the QuickFields process. When you are building processes, this output information is going to be very useful to help you see what exactly QuickFields did and what those results are. So here, for example, the value for our token could not be found. That's because it was on a page without a token or without a barcode. So we added page 2 to the document. We could go back and look at that page to see why. Why didn't it find the barcode? But in this case, it's because it's our second page of that document. Under processing information, this will give you a lot of information as well. So here we have our no text found warning, saying it couldn't find text for the employee name. If we double click, that's going to bring us to our page. And that is not the first page of our letter, so that's why we don't have that information there. One thing that I find really fun with QuickFields is at the very bottom left, it will tell you how long scanning had taken, how many total pages it processed, and how many pages per minute your process is running. If your process is running really slowly and your pages per minute are low, you can go back and review some of your processes that you're running within the QuickFields session to identify what those bottlenecks are and see if there's a way to improve them. If we go through our documents on the bottom left in the document revision pane, we can see here we have our invoice number 1000 that had matched and our information populated from our database. And that matched all of our invoices correctly. If we look at our HR letters, you can see here we have a redaction over cities digital. We have our metadata extracted from the correct regions on our document. And here we have other instances of cities digital that did not get redacted. So let's go back to auto-annotation to see if we can figure out why. So if we have one space that matches, if our OCR identifies two spaces, that's not going to match. So we can change this. Instead of having a space here, we can use a regular expression of \s for a white space character and the plus sign to indicate one or more. We will click OK. And I'm going to delete these documents and run this again. And it still didn't identify them. If we select our zone here, this is searching for all pages. So I will have to investigate further to see why it is only pulling out the first instance. Our text looks correct. That's another thing to always check. If your annotation process isn't doing what you would expect, you can double check that your text is correct by opening the text preview and looking at the actual OCR text. We have a question of, can we redact based on location instead of OCR? And yes, we can. Zoom out. We can add the annotation option. Say all pages. Next, this is auto annotation 2. Next, we are going to apply a redaction. I am in the wrong process here. We can configure quick fields to add annotations. Fixed annotation, that's the option. So with a fixed annotation, we can annotate that way. Are there any other questions regarding our quick field session here? Okay, our next item is the G is different in front of digital. That would not make a difference there. That's just the font face on our annotation process here. Okay, we have a question asking, can you use a PDF as the sample, or must it be an image, for example, a TIFF? I believe you can use a PDF for your document sample page. Nope, it looks like it does need to be a TIFF. We have a question, if a document already has OCR, can we use that, or does the system need to do it itself? If we are using Laserfiche Capture engine as our scanning source, we'll show our scan source setup. And configuring my authentication, I'm going to be using Windows. Validate, okay. When we retrieve our entries, we can retrieve them from a specific path. We can choose what that name would be and what we are going to be retrieving. Under document content, this is where I believe, yes, we can select to retrieve the text of that image or those documents, and then Quick Fields will not need to re-OCR that document if they are already OCR'd. If we are processing PDFs, we can generate images for those PDFs as we pull them in. We have options for converting to black and white, scaling images to a certain DPI, and a few other options here. We can also limit the number of items that we are retrieving using using Laserfiche Capture Engine. So we can limit to the number of documents retrieved from each folder, number of pages, and limit the total number of entries waiting to be processed. Are there any additional questions at this time? If you're like me and always think of your best questions as soon as the meeting or the webinar is over, please definitely reach out to CDI. There are many additional resources available, such as Laserfiche Answers, Laserfiche Solutions Exchange, the Laserfiche Support site, and the CDI YouTube channel. Or you can contact CDI directly using consulting, sales, or support at citiesdigital.com. Thank you everyone for taking time today for attending the webinar. My name is Michael Mathis. I'm the Client Services Director at CDI. I don't see any additional questions coming in. So again, thank you very much everyone. And do not hesitate to reach out if you do have any other questions or concerns.